It reminds me, what you ask, it reminds me suddenly of my eldest son, Jonathan, years ago, almost 40 years ago, when he was 4 years old, and he came back from school and they studied about the Shoah for the first time in the kindergarten, not from school, at the age of 4 or 3. And he was all shocked and all shaken. And I thought children should be protected from such knowledge about the capacity of the cruelty of human beings. And I thought I made a rule to myself to answer him only the things that he asked, not to initiate information that might be too much for him to hold, to contain. And children know when they can take it and when they cannot, and you see the moment when they avert from the conversation, they disappear from a conversation when suddenly it's too much for them. So there are these pair of powers, the total need of the elderly people to tell their stories and the total need of the children to protect themselves from this story, or to take only what they can swallow, so to say. It's a very painful game of who will know more and who will remember more. It reminds me a line by the great Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. The winner be he who remembers, or she who remembers. The one who has the memory will win in the end. If I am not sure what's the meaning of winning here in this context, but probably the one who knows more will have more ways to cope with life, cope with what has been done. And I found out that when I tell an old story with new words, things are being changed. Because you see, every one of us, we have the official story of our life. A story about how we have been raised by our parents who maybe did not understand us, maybe ridiculed us, our siblings who were tough with us, our teachers, our friends who were rude to us. And over the years, we know how to crystallize this very intimate personal story, and we tell it, we give it to every new acquaintance that we want to make impression on. We want her or him to like us, to love us, to have mercy upon us, who knows. And over the years, we sharpened this story again and again to almost to a perfect story, because we tell it so good that we don't want to give up on it. But maybe if we look at ourselves suddenly from afar, from distance, we start to think that maybe this formal official story of us has imprisoned us, has paralyzed us. Maybe it prevents us from breaking through and being what we can be. Maybe it traps us in this existence that is parallel to our life and prevents us from living our life.
Dear all, my name is Grzegorz Jankowicz and I work as Program Director of the Conrad Festival. This is an extra interview from a year-long series of events titled The Nature of the Future. With this set of online events, we put in context important notions and themes of this year's edition of Conrad. My guest today is Dawid Grosman. Hello, Dawid.
Hello, good to see you.
Very good to see you again. Dawid Grosman is an Israeli writer, very well known in Poland, an author of several books translated into more than 30 languages. He is also a peace activist. This is a very important part of his activity. A few months ago, I did an interview with Dawid at the Jewish Culture Festival. We brought up both literature and political topics, the latter focusing on Palestine. This conversation is still available at Play Kraków platform for those of you who are interested. For those of you who want to watch this conversation, please look for it there. I promised then that I will talk to Dawid again when his new novel will be released in Poland, and it is already here, translated by Magdalena Zomer. The title in Polish is Gdyby wiedziała. The stories in it and behind it are very touching. The main theme is inherited trauma, inherited pain which determines the lives of a few generations. The pain is given from generation to generation and creates a vicious circle from which the characters in the novel cannot break free. They cannot imagine a better future because they live in the past, they live with the past. This is the reason I decided to put the interview with David in the context of the nature of the future. David, thank you again for accepting our invitation.
With pleasure. I remember very well our last talk, and I hope this one will be as interesting as the last one.
I will try to ask interesting questions and inspiring questions for you. Now, at certain point, Gili, the narrator of your novel, asks her grandmother a very important question. She asks, what's wrong with adults in the family? What's wrong with them? They don't protect children's innocence at all. The answer of the grandmother is, I want you to know the truth about each event of my life. And Gili asks, why? Why do you want me to know all of it? And the grandmother says that she wants her to know about everything because she feels that Gili is similar to her. So what's wrong with adults in this family you present in your novel, David?
They are so affected and infected by what has happened to them that they cannot contain it. And there is a kind of strong awareness of the secret that runs in the family, of the wound that runs in the family. Yet people do not talk about it, do not openly talk about it. And because of that, the wound and the pain, they accumulate and they become really devastating until there is a moment where they cannot be contained anymore, and it erupts, it explodes. And then the three women, Vera, Nina, and Gili, they go together to the place where all this tragedy has started, where things started to get wrong, and where the wound was created and kept open for so many years. And there is a feeling that if you tell a child about what has happened there and there, he will be on your side, because there is always this secret. It's not a competition even. It's a very painful game of who will know more and who will remember more. It reminds me a line by the great Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. The winner be he who remembers, or she who remembers. The one who has the memory will win in the end. If I am not sure what's the meaning of winning here in this context, but probably the one who knows more will have more ways to cope with life, cope with what has been done.
Yes, but this decision to confront children with such stories like stories about sexuality, about domestic violence, about this traumatic event that started all of it. So these stories are being called by Gili as a crime. She calls it a crime to herself because she doesn't have enough capacity. She doesn't have psychological strength to understand them and to contain them. So it's not so obvious for her. It is not, she doesn't understand this gesture of her grandmother only in a positive way, that it's a try to remember, to pass the remembrance about the past to next generation.
Yeah. Well, Vera, my character, she's not a psychological person, and maybe she lacks the psychological mechanisms that would tell her not to tell her daughter at a too early stage. But she's so crushed and so pressured by the burden of her story that she must make it more available and accessible to her beloved granddaughter. It reminds me, what you ask, it reminds me suddenly of my eldest son, Jonathan, years ago, almost 40 years ago, when he was 4 years old, and he came back from school and they studied about the Shoah for the first time in the kindergarten, not from school, at the age of 4 or 3. And he was all shocked and all shaken. And I thought children should be protected from such knowledge about the capacity of the cruelty of human beings. And I thought I made a rule to myself to answer him only the things that he asked, not to initiate information that might be too much for him to hold, to contain. And children know when they can take it and when they cannot, and you see the moment when they avert from the conversation, they disappear from a conversation when suddenly it's too much for them. So there are these pair of powers, the total need of the elderly people to tell their stories and the total need of the children to protect themselves from this story or to take only what they can swallow, so to say.
The paradox is that such openness about certain aspects of experience covers something else. I had this feeling that Vera, telling the stories from the past, at the same time covers something very important. Would you agree that this openness is also a mask?
Yes, it's a mask, and at the same time, we know that masks reveal something about the person who wears them. She is flirting with the need to tell and the fear to tell. And I remember how it was with me when she first started to tell me about what has happened. She all the time wanted me to know and did not want me to know. I felt that it's not a mask, but she was torn between those contradictory urges, and I respected it. And I also feel that the reader of the book will probably feel the same thing. He or she will be torn between the need to know more and the fear to know more, and also to feel both urges, of supporting her, and on the other hand, judging her critically. Here is Vera, the old lady.
You said that she told you this. The Vera character is based on a real person. We will move to this aspect of your novel later. Let me ask a few more questions about this masking and unmasking, this gesture of bringing something from the past to next generation and at the same time covering something else. I felt that one of the aspects of your narrative, a transition from the first person to the third person narrative, has something to do with masking the experience. It is Gilly herself who does this transition in her own account. It looks to me like she wants to distance herself from certain things.
Yeah, it's a very, very good reading of the book. Thank you. She also moves between the first person and the third person. She also, even though she's not a baby and not a girl anymore, she's 39, but she's terrified from the revelation of the secret. She feels something. She feels that something is hovering around her, a mystery, a secret. And of course, like everyone, she wants to know what the secret is, because she understands that once she knows what the secret is, she will know who is herself. Who is herself? She doesn't know. She lives in parallel to the life that she should have had. And she knows that the revelation of the secret will bring her in contact with her real self. So just think of yourself in this situation. Of course, you would like to know, and at the same time, you will be afraid of knowing. So all the characters in this story, they have this very delicate, complicated dance, even I will call it, between knowing more and more and more about themselves from the others, from the person who tells them the story, and knowing less, because to know is to be totally exposed and to stand naked in front of reality.
And do I understand, do I feel adequately that you are also inviting to this dance your readers?
I think this is the part of the pleasure of reading, that we are swept into a story, and it's hard to resist because we want to know how it's going to develop, where it's going to take us, and what is the answer to all the secrets of my story, of the voyage that they are doing. That this is part of the pleasure of writing, the way the writer distributes or spreads the information, the essential information. And good books are books that all the time you feel the tension, almost the erotic tension of the relationship between the reader and the writer. What the writer allows you to understand, what he is not allowing you, what he is telling you as if he is had to and he had no choice but to tell it, and what the writer is preventing, blocking you from knowing until a certain moment.
Your characters want to understand the events from the past, as you said, as I said in my comment. To do so, they record the stories on camera and in text. This is, I guess, very important aspect of the story, of your book. Gilly brings the events from the past in a non-linear way, referring to various family films. She tries to gather pieces of the past watching these films. Some of the films were never presented, never shown to anybody, neither by her father, who is a filmmaker, nor by herself. These recordings were hidden. Why did you choose this way of presenting the story? Why did you choose to put so much stress on film?
I'm not sure it's too much. I like to mix other arts with writing. And I thought that the camera becomes also a mask, because for Gilly, you can either hide behind the camera or expose other people. And the other people in this trip are being exposed by the camera. We see that Gilly asked them, or Nina asked them to talk into the camera as if they are talking to the future Nina, the Nina that will see these films many years from now in the future. And suddenly Gilly, who holds the camera, she notices that Vera, as if she made a kind of a bond with the Nina of the future, not with the Nina who sits next to her, who is much more problematic and threatening to her because what Vera did to her when she was a child. And she prefers to talk into a kind of an imaginary character that exists or not exists in the future.
I mentioned the story behind the novel. It's fascinating and disturbing. It's a story of one Evy Panić, whom you met, with whom you talked about her experiences. Who was she?
She was a lady that was born in Croatia to a well-to-do Jewish family. And at a certain point at her life, when she was married to Rade Panić, and the mother of one child, Nina, she was arrested by the UDBA, the Secret Service of Tito, and suspected to be an enemy of the people, she and her husband. I'll tell later about what happened to them, but she called me one day. She asked if I'm willing to speak with her. I said, of course, yeah. And she said she had a remark regarding something I wrote in the papers, and she wanted to criticize me. I said, okay, I learn, I hear. And then I said, may I ask you a question? Because I was taken by her very unusual accent. It was a mixture of Serbo-Croatian, Hungarian, and Hebrew, Ivrit accent, very unusual. And I asked her about her background, and she started to tell me. And then at a very pivotal moment of the story, she stopped and she said, but I don't want to bother you with my boring stories. maybe we shall say hello now, shalom now, and I'll call you sometime in the future. And I said, yes, if you want, I would like to hear it all night, but if you want, go, let's talk in the future. The future came after 2 or 3 days. She called and we continued the conversation. And then again, at the very important point of the story, she said, but I think I'm talking too much and probably it's very boring. Why would a young man like you be so interested in the memories of an old lady? And she quitted the conversation. The third time, I already knew her method, the method of Scheherazade, you know, to keep me alert, to keep me interested and magneted to the story. And I told her that, and she laughed to her ears almost. And then we started to talk, and we spoke, and she allowed me to write down what she told me. And we met several times in Jerusalem or in her kibbutz in the north of Israel. And we became very close friends for the last 20 years of her life, between she was 77 and 97. At the age of 97, she died, and I lost a very good, clever, unique friend. Everyone is a unique human being, but Eva was unique in a uniquer way. She was really very, very strong person. On the one hand, she was like iron when she had to defend ideals and ideas and values. On the other hand, she was so soft and empathetic and warm when she had to protect human beings or to think of human beings. She was a very strong leftist in Israel against the occupation, against the settlement. She went to demonstrate every Friday in the main crossroads in Israel when she was already 95, 96, 97, until her last moment. And from the very beginning, when I wrote her story, I told her that I'm not going to document her. I'm not a documentarist. I'm not going to describe her one-to-one exactly as she is, because this is, as a fiction writer, it's less attractive to me. I need to imagine her. I need to fantasize her. I need to reinvent her. But of course, I will never impose on her things that do not suit her inner constitution, that will be only imposure of me on her in interiority. And she accepted it immediately, and she said, yes, this is the freedom, the license of the poet, licentia poetica. And step by step, first reluctantly, then like a flood, she gave me her story. And I took it and I wrote it down and I reinvented it and I reimagined many scenes in it. And now she's gone. And I'm sorry that she didn't have time to read the book when it came out. But I had a feeling that even when the book was harsh on her, she would have liked it. This is what I heard from her daughter and her granddaughter, because she was not a person who would beautify or flatter the readers. She was tough and truthful, totally truthful.
For those who do not know the arcanes of conflict between Tito's Yugoslavia and the USSR, could you give a short information about how Kominformists were treated by Tito and what happened to Eva and her husband?
Tito was a very special leader and very unusual in the eyes of the West. First of all, he has not been beaten by the Nazis in the Second World War, which made him a hero. And this heroism started to annoy or to nervous Stalin, who was afraid that Tito will become too strong. So probably Stalin started to accumulate power and people in order to invade Yugoslavia. And Tito was very suspicious towards the intentions of Stalin. And in 1948, when the tension between these two peoples got to its climax, Tito started to build gulags all over Yugoslavia, where he has imprisoned, jailed tens of thousands of people who were against, he thought were against his regime and in favor of Stalin. And even Rade Panić, the husband of Evy Panić, was one of the heroes of the war and a person very close to Tito. One day he was arrested on the accusation that he supported the enemy, that he supported Stalin. He was interrogated for 2 days, and in the interrogations, he hanged himself and died. And the UDBA, the Secret Service, came to Evy Panić and brought her to where they have interrogated him and urged her to declare her husband an enemy of the people. And they said, you have 2 choices. There is one door in this room that will send you to freedom and the honorable life, you and your little daughter, Tiana. The other door will send you to Goli Otok, this gulag that was called Goli Otok, naked island, because no vegetation was possible on it because of the climate, terrible conditions. And she was given 3 minutes to consider her answer. 3 minutes. And she said that she knew that her daughter will always be saved by relatives and by friends, but no one will save the memory and the heritage of dear Rade. And she made her choice. Her choice is a very tough choice, and all the 3 generations of the family are overcast by it and shadowed by it and distorted by it. I guess the reader who hears it for the first time find it hard to identify with her. But I think I tried to portray her in such a way that for these 3 moments, even if in the end you will decide that you will choose your daughter and not your dead husband, even then there will be moments of hesitation, because she lived in such a time, as she told me, and she said, you will not understand it, because I lived in such a time, she said, that values were more important than human beings. At your era, it's your time, she said to me, people are more important. Everything is about the personality. Everything is about egoism and egocentrism. We lived in another world. We live in a world where the values and the ideas were those who made life worth living. And she made her choice. And the book is about that. And the book is also about, can one recover from such a trauma? The mother and the daughter. And here I must say that this was my great lesson from writing this book, because the 2 women who were on the 2 edges of human options, of cruelty, of brutality, they found in themselves the power to reconcile, to come back to each other, to love each other, to live their life in a way together. It was something really hard to describe even.
In the novel, there is a scene when father, while recording Vera's account, tells Gili to ask one question to her grandmother. Would you do exactly the same thing now, after all these years? Did you ask this question to Eva?
I did, of course. Can you imagine that I will not ask? I asked, it burned in me. And she said immediately, without hesitation, I would do the same thing again. Now, but I must tell you that the rapidity of her answer, the way the answer was ready for her, make me think that maybe she would not have done it as she did 40 or 50 years ago. But she had to protect not only herself, but her whole era. She had to protect a worldview that she felt if she denied this worldview, all her world will collapse, will crumble down. And she chose to tell her version and to adhere, to cling to her version. And her pain was so obvious, the pain on her face, sorry, that I think I should not pressure more about this point.
I had this thought that you put film into your novel because of what happened with Eva's story when Danilo Kish and Aleksander Mangic decided to present the story to the broad audience. What they did, they tried to achieve by this movie, by making this movie titled Goli Żywot, Bare Life, in 1989, they tried to give voice to women sent to Goli Otok. The film brought these events to public attention and brought to this public attention the fact that women too were inmates at prisons and camps for Kominformits. Tell me, what do you think about this movie? I'm sure that you watched it before writing your novel.
No, I haven't watched it. I watched another film made by Avner Feng-Gellert and Dr. Maccabit Abramson, a documentary film that was done in Israel and in Goli Otok, and I found it really very interesting. But I went in other direction, and I learned in the past, you know, when I wrote a story about something very specific, and I heard that another person is doing the same thing, writing about this thing, let's say a dog even, or a vase, and then I realized that when it comes to real art, everyone has his or her point of view, and we create a totally different world. And I recommend people to see the movie of Avner and Maccabit, because it's really eye-opening. This has its place. My book has its place.
And have you studied other accounts by inmates, female inmates of Tito's prisons and camps, especially the accounts created by Milka Zicina, whose book, published after her death, titled Sfe, which means everything, 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 has changed the perspective of historians writing about Kominformits. Milka was probably the only writer convinced for Kominform activity. Have you come across these
no,
books?
Again, no. And I must say that sometimes I don't want even to be influenced by other points of view and by other writers. Sometimes it's essential for me to be exposed to it, and sometimes I feel I want to write this story in my own way, not being influenced by others.
I totally understand this. I ask these questions because Danilo Kish gave Evy Panić voice. She could speak for the first time. She could speak. She and her colleague, also kept in this on this island, they could speak as victims. In your novel, women speak about their experiences, but the perspective is a little bit different. Vera speaks not only as a victim, but also as someone who made this impossible decision, impossible choice, determining her daughter's life. She is recognized, especially by her granddaughter, as someone responsible. Even if it was based on a real story, the point of view creates an image in which the pressure and responsibility is on women's shoulder. It is striking even more when we think about men characters, about men from this family. They are either dead heroes, as Miloš, or observers, as Gili's father.
It's mainly a book about women, I think, and about the power of women, and about the relationship between the three women. They lived, the Goli Otok that Eva knew was a camp of women only. They hardly saw men there. So all the relationship and everything that happened between women and women. What I liked about the story of Eva, of Vera, is that she was a victim, of course. I mean, she was asked to do terrible things. She has been tormented. She's been humiliated. I don't want to make a spoiler, but she went through very harsh experiences, and yet she maintained her dignity. She never gave away names of other friends. She never betrayed anyone. She was herself, and to be yourself in such circumstances is something very difficult. I mean, the cruelty there is jamming all the compasses, the moral compasses. And she was able, in the middle of hell, really to remain herself. And you feel it when she told me the stories. You know, she didn't boast or, you know, took pride of it. She just told it, sometimes in a dry way. She told the facts. And again, something to learn from. And I mean, I feel it's a very feminine book. And it shows different ways of being a woman, of being a mother, of being a grandmother, of being a daughter. Rafi was the husband of Nina and the father of Gili, and the adopted son of Eva. He is someone that I needed in order, you know, to soften a little the extremity of the plot, and to bring some warmth and tenderness and kindness into the harsh struggle between them, and to be as a mediator between the three when they cannot communicate. I don't know how this journey would have looked like without his presence. Yeah.
And the story of Eva, was it commented in Israel? Was it a point of reference for some discussions? It was very powerfully present in Croatia after, and Serbia, other countries that created this multinational form called Yugoslavia, especially after Danilo Kish movie and some text, also books about Evy Panić. It was discussed there. How about Israel?
In Israel, I mean, the book was very well received. And I know that in the ex-Yugoslavian communities, there are several in Israel, it was dealt and discussed. When the book came out, I came to the kibbutz. It's a kind of a community where Evy Panić lived most of her life when she came to Israel. And I asked to have an evening for the book. And people came, many people came, people from the Yugoslavian group inside this kibbutz. And it was amazing to see how suddenly they were able to start to talk about what has happened there. And they started to sing songs from this period. And they started to tell stories about Evy Panić Nahir, about, you know, small, sweet and bitter crumbs of information of her life. And there was a feeling that I brought the story back into its origins. And even more than that, even the language that Vera spoke was a very special language, as I described it. And, you know, it was a language of refugees, of people who came to Israel and were never assimilated into the Israeliness and to the Hebrew. And I remember as a child of 7, 9, 10, my generation, we were ashamed of our parents because they spoke this funny, ridiculous language, this distorted language, and we always tried to buffer between our friends and our parents that they will not know how ridiculous, quote unquote, our parents are. And now suddenly this language got a legitimacy. It was written in a book and people read the book. And even the name of the book in Hebrew, unlike the name in Polish and in some other languages, is Life with Me Plays a Lot. With me, life plays a lot. And everybody who reads it understands that it's a distorted phrase. And it's a broken language of a broken people. And people suddenly started to write me telling, thank you for legitimizing the language of our parents and our grandparents. And suddenly, as if there is a rehabilitation of this language and of the guilt we felt towards this generation that did not have a voice in Israel, actually, did not have a voice. And this book, in a small scale, of course, gave it a voice.
Two gestures seem to be crucial whenever we touch such experiences. First, from what you said, I have this thought that two gestures are really important. Remembering the past and saving the victim's subjectivity and dignity. In your novel, you present the problem. The pain travels between generations. But what is the solution? What is the solution on a social level? How should we speak? How should we talk about that kind of past experiences in private and public spheres?
First of all, we should talk, we should express ourselves, we should surface the story, the hidden story, the secret story, the shameful stories. And it's being done usually, but it takes a lot of time. Usually after the participants of a certain drama die, then there is someone who is able to go and to research and to surface the story. But I found out, and I think we spoke about it in Krakow, that there is a very existential role to the telling of stories. Almost in every book of mine, I think there is a person telling his or her story to another human being. And the listener is usually a good listener, not an obtuse listener. And I found out that when I tell an old story with new words, things are being changed. Because you see, every one of us, we have the official story of our life. A story about how we have been raised by our parents who maybe did not understand us, maybe ridiculed us, our siblings who were tough with us, our teachers, our friends who were rude to us. And over the years, we know how to crystallize this very intimate personal story, and we tell it, we give it to every new acquaintance that we want to make impression on. We want her or him to like us, to love us, to have mercy upon us, who knows. And over the years, we sharpened this story again and again to almost to a perfect story, because we tell it so good that we don't want to give up on it. But maybe if we look at ourselves suddenly from afar, from distance, we start to think that maybe this formal official story of us has imprisoned us, has paralyzed us. Maybe it prevents us from breaking through and being what we can be. Maybe it traps us in this existence that is parallel to our life and prevents us from living our life. And I think that if we allow ourselves to go, 1 inch to the right or 1 inch to the left and tell the same story, well, this time from the point of view of our mother, maybe we understand that what she did was out of love, but a kind of complicated love. Maybe we understand that also Mama had a Mama. Maybe we understand that also Papa has the right for a psychology. Not only us deserve a psychology and psychologist, also our parents do. And of course, when you do that, suddenly you start to breathe with both lungs. You understand how much you were, how to say, curling around the wrong story and protect it and strengthen it. But maybe it's not the only story. Maybe there are more stories, even recognizing this principle that there is a legitimacy for many stories to describe my own tragedy. And that telling my tragedy again and again sometimes is the only privilege that a person who has been wounded has. And of course, it applies not only for human beings, this need to retell the old story, but also to nations, to countries, because every country needs in the beginning, in the coming of it to a country, to become a country, it needs legislative stories, mythological stories about how heroic the people of this army were and how they fought with dignity and killed the ferocious enemy and the evil and the corrupt enemy. And we really believe in it, and we build statues to celebrate it. But then maybe it's useful for people to look back at our official stories and to say, yes, they were very good at their time, very relevant, but now we need other stories. We need other ways to tell the story. We, for example, should allow the story of the enemy to infiltrate into our internal stories and maybe to challenge it there, and maybe to converse with it there, and maybe to massage something that was stiff and forbidden and preventing and really reducing us and narrowing us down. Maybe if we allow ourselves to, just as a mental exercise, to look at the story of the other, of the story of the enemy, and not to impose our constitution on the enemy, but to have the constitution of the enemy itself talking. Maybe we understand suddenly the misery of the enemy, the real deep misery, the real deep tragedy. Or maybe we understand the mistakes of the enemy, and we might even help him to get out of this mistaken state of mind. So it is so essential and existential to tell and to retell old stories, as if to massage the mind. We are a massagist, after all, writers, and it can be to massage the narrative of the Israelis and the Palestinians. The narrative is a word that I really hate, because narrative means a human story that has congealed, that has frozen. And what we do when we write about the narrative of a husband and wife, parents and their children, Israelis and Palestinians, we are, as I said, massaging, melting it slowly, until suddenly there is movement there. And only where there is movement, there can be a change, and a change, I hope, for example, between us and the Palestinians, a change in the direction of solving the problem between us and start to live normal life with two normal states that will live in peace with each other and will start to feel at home in the world. Because the main definition of a Jew as an individual and as a collective is of someone who never felt at home. And having a state for us, having a state for the Palestinians, will allow both of us to feel at home in the world. But again, as I said, it always starts with a new story.
We all have, or most of us have, inherited pain, inherited traumas. Do you believe that it is possible to drop this inherited pain, or should we simply learn how to lead our lives with it?
I think we all live our life with it, some by denial, which is also a legitimate way. You cannot force people to look into their wound and to understand what has been done to them. But I think enough people are looking straight into themselves and into others and into their country, and they find the way to both not denying the brutality that they have suffered from, the trauma, you can say, not to deny it, to be able to live with it, to make it more loose, not to allow it to crush their lives and to limit their life. So it's possible, I think, to not to forget, because how can one forget a trauma? It will make itself present in so many ways. Not to forget, but at the same time, to move forward, not to waste all your life in thought about the injustice that has been done to you, just to move forward, to, as I said, to take the maybe only privilege that a wounded person has, and this is to tell his story by his own words, not to allow other people to impose their language on his trauma.
Referring to the Polish title of your novel, if Nina would know, do you think that if she knew what happened back then to her mother, Vera, and to her father, why Vera decided to stay on his side, would that change the track of her life?
Who knows? Really, it's so hard to know. I guess that if as a child she heard about what they really did and they really acted, I don't think she will be so forgiving. A child cannot understand such complexity. But I think that, and I saw it, that Tiana, the daughter of Evy Panić here, when I met her in the United States for the writing of this book, I felt that she found her way. She became an artist. She knows how to use her art in order to coexist with the trauma she suffered from. She's a very active, courageous woman. And she teaches the way for me at least.
David, thank you very much for this conversation. Another conversation about the world, about its various realities seen from the perspective of literature. Dear readers, there will be more interviews from the Nature of the Future series, so please be with us and be with Conrad Festival. David, thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.